point in the meeting, we take some time, share a few words to give us a means to reflect on how we're engaging with our practice. So this being Kriya Yoga Awareness Month, I thought I'd speak on the topic of Kriya Yoga specifically. Now, it's quite a big topic, and we could talk about it for at least a week-long retreat. But I am limited in the time I have, so I thought I would try and make it as concise and to the point as possible. And for me, I, through my own reflection, have come to understand Kriya Yoga fundamentally, and this may sound obvious, but as a means for self-enquiry. That's what Kriya Yoga is guiding us and assisting us in, and facilitating our being able to experience that, the inquiry of ourselves. Now, when we talk about inquiring into who we are or what we are, when we talk about realization, the realization of the self, there's terminology there which can be broken down or investigated a little bit more. And depending on who we talk to, they might use other terms. So while self-realization is shared as being the principle, the primary focus of the tradition of yoga, in other traditions they'll use other names. And then when we translate different foreign terms from either Sanskrit, or if it's Buddhism, you might translate it from Pali. And these terms can be interpreted and translated in different ways. Some people refer to it as truth, to discover truth, to know truth. And this guy in itself has certain limitations and can be questioned and pulled apart in lots of different ways. Truth, higher consciousness, absolute reality, absolute consciousness, pure awareness. So we have lots of different terms that we use to refer to in reference to what we're trying to achieve. So Kriya Yoga is a path of self-realization. It's a path guiding us to know all of these things depending on what you might like to refer to it as. And the thing that's preventing us from being able to do it, the reason why we have to embark on this path in the first place, is because of avidya, ignorance. Now, the term ignorance, again, when I was growing up, sometimes we'd use the term ignorance as a more polite way of saying stupid. So when we talk about avidya, does it mean that we're all stupid and we don't have the intellectual capacity? So the term ignorance is an English word that we're using to explain avidya. Avidya is the opposite. It's the negative form, the a in Sanskrit, negating vidya, vidya being wisdom. So it's a lack of wisdom, a lack of insight. So Kriya Yoga is a path of insight, a path of wisdom, a path which is endeavoring to help us to move beyond ignorance so that we can experience vidya. And that insight then, that wisdom, will be our experiencing, and depending on how we want to call it, truth or awareness, absolute reality. So if we are acting from a position of avidya, ignorance, what does our relationship to reality look like? We're talking about absolute reality, something which if we try to imagine, what absolute reality is, And we may read different texts which use different ways of explaining absolute reality. And this might guide us in our interpretation, and then we sit with it. How do we imagine absolute reality? How do we imagine a reality which is different to the one that we are experiencing, but which is said to be the whole thing, which is said to be the actual truth? And so our mind can get itself in knots, because that reality that we're endeavoring to imagine is without condition, without definition. And our mind, in its efforts to imagine it, is only able to do so with definition, with conditioning. And so we're already experiencing deficiency. So reality for us, from the point of view of a lack of wisdom, a lack of insight, from the position of ignorance, is one where it is conditioned. It is defined. It's been compartmentalized and broken down and categorized. And this is the world of phenomena. Now, we can relate to this world of phenomena in different ways. Right now, I'm speaking to you, and the world of phenomena is being communicated through words and language. And I know for some of you, English is not your first language. So straight away, we've got the idea of multiple languages. So now we have phenomena being able to express in different languages. Different languages representing different cultures, cultures representing different historical narratives that intertwine and overlap and go back into our ancestry. And so there's a lot of phenomena which has preceded our being here talking and experiencing this space together. So when we experience reality from our position of avidya, a position of ignorance, we're doing so to our association and our relationship to all this phenomena. And this phenomena is based on an agreed upon version of things we may have experienced when we've traveled to a foreign country where the culture is quite different to our own. A certain, what they call, culture clash, because the conventions of that culture don't match the conventions of our culture. And so we find ourselves at odds. And to the point where we might even start criticizing it, complaining about it, calling it out for its inadequacy. Yeah. But even within our own culture, we have conventions where we may expect people to uphold these conventions and adhere to these conventions, this phenomena, in certain ways. And when they don't, we call them out, we blame them, we criticize them, we judge them. But the conventions are phenomena which have been created. They have no substance. And they change over time. The conventions of our era are different to the conventions of hundreds of years ago. In every era, they had different social norms which people had to adhere by. And even now in the 21st century, we see that the conventions are shifting in great ways in relation to gender identity, in relation to the role of the feminine, the role of the masculine, even in relation to practices such as the one we're engaged in. So conventions change, and they're always changing. But we identify with them because they allow us to create a social order, an organization or an organizing of things in relation to a society where we can engage with one another in a way where we're not continuously experiencing disorder. But everything that we're using is a convention. It's a conceptualized idea of how things should be. And they have evolved. And they've evolved so subtly over such a long period of time that they have the appearance of being reality. And so we've come to be part of this social order. And we use our language to communicate our ideas in relation to it. And even Kriya Yoga itself as a tradition is a formation based on the experience of living within such a social order. Now, it may be referred to as a tradition which is age old, or what might be referred to as millennia old. But even back all those millennia, people were interacting using language. And they were interacting based on convention, based on expectations of how things should be. And people had a definition of who they were in relation to what was going on. And so they defined themselves based on the circumstances of how they were relating to the norms, the conceptualized conventions of their time. And the rishis, the seers, the ones who realized that people were being duped, people were taking this too seriously, that everything was a fabrication, that it wasn't the ultimate reality, decided to create a system to help people to approach their own ignorance, their lack of wisdom, their lack of insight. So they came up with a systematic approach with tools and techniques to facilitate inquiry, to facilitate the persons being able to question their relationship to this delusion of what was real. So it's not that it's not real as in we don't experience it. We do experience it, but it's not real in terms of its substance, its foundational reliability. It's shifting, it's changing, it's evolving, it's growing. It can come and it can go. And it can vary in many different ways. And if we were to take ourselves out of our current position and our subjective experience of reality as it is right now, and go back 500 years, maybe to 500 years ago in native Central America or South America, we could find ourselves all of a sudden not being able to understand and appreciate the conventions of those times and the ways of the people then. So change is a constant. And because of that, there's no reliability in it. And change has its own polarity, which allows for attention, so to facilitate more change. And we buy into this. So we have within our cultural norms a spectrum of things being good or bad, positive, negative, rich, poor, expensive, inexpensive, good, bad. I might have said that one already. But you know what I'm pointing towards. We have this duality, which is inherent into the system, which is facilitating our being able to live within the conventions of an organized society. But all of these are just conceptual. The idea of something being right or wrong is conceptualized. Now, we may take a moment just to swallow that, because we can ask about, but isn't murder wrong? Isn't such an act wrong? And of course, we've all been part of a reality which has agreed that murder is wrong. Now, I'm not saying that murder is not wrong, but we're speaking from the level of phenomena. We're speaking from the level of engaging with phenomena, which has been refined, modified, and continues to be modified and refined based on an upgrading of the conceptions, of the notions, of the ideas, on the basis that society is learning from its self. That the relation of the one personality to another personality is giving way to more understanding of what might work to facilitate more harmony, togetherness. But this harmony and togetherness is based on the experience of one to another. And so it has a tension within it. And so we come up with conceptualized notions of how this can be facilitated so that a greater harmony can be experienced. So we're living from this point of view. And what the rishis, the seers, were pointing towards is that this is not reality. That's not reality. You're part of it, you're experiencing it. But it's the object. See it as the object. You are the experiencer. So when we talk about the experiencer, we say, okay, well, I'm living in this reality. I'm part of it. My name's David and I'm here and I'm engaging and I have family. I'm engaging in society. I have family. I have work. I have responsibilities. I have duties. And all of this is true. But what the rishis were saying was that this personality itself is phenomena. The character that has been formed based on the conventions of the society itself. That you are a product of society. So see yourself as that. And know yourself to be that which is able to appreciate your personality, the goings on, all of it as changing phenomena with no continuous reality to it, no reliable truth to it. The truth is that which sees. So know yourself to be that. So we're engaging here in this discussion, and I'm sitting here and I'm talking, and I have consciousness. We can appreciate that I'm a conscious being, and you guys have consciousness, and we can appreciate that you're a conscious being. So we're all conscious beings. But is it a case of my consciousness being different to your consciousness? My awareness being different to your awareness? Or is that experience of being conscious the same? Now we can talk about memories, we can talk about imagination, we can talk about these things, but consciousness can exist without memories, without imagination. Consciousness itself is the source of these things. It's consciousness which allows us to appreciate the experience of thought processes, the experience of remembering, the experience of imagining. So when it comes to talking about consciousness, is it my consciousness? Is it your consciousness? There's just consciousness. But we have a tendency to relate to consciousness as being something which we own, which belongs to us. And so when we engage in the practice of Kriya Yoga, and I know from my own experience, that tendency is there. I am going to be self-realized. I am going to be an extremely effective Kriya Yoga practitioner, and I'm going to get it. I'm going to achieve it. And I'm going to be self-realized. And I am going to experience absolute awareness. But the I in there is preventing me from doing just that. And the reason is because that I is associating to the experience as if it was a phenomena, as if it was something to be achieved. But it's not something to be achieved. It's what's going on. Conscious awareness is there, it's present. What's stopping it from being the dominant, what's the right word to use here? It's not experience, it's not state, but what's stopping it from being appreciated as the ultimate reality, as the absolute reality, as what's fundamentally going on, is being caught up in phenomena. So, there's a tendency, again, I experienced this as being a Kriya Yoga practitioner, of looking at others in the world and thinking, why are they wasting their time with these things? I'm a Kriya Yoga practitioner. I've got it down. I'm going the right way. The Kriya Yoga is phenomenal. The techniques are phenomenal. The teaching is phenomenal. My talking here is phenomenal. And so the relationship that we've established with the I in it, I'm going to get this experience. I'm going to get truth. I'm going to achieve absolute awareness. I'm going to achieve absolute reality. And I'm going to do it by doing these things. Already it's misleading us. Now, I'm not trying to say that Kriya Yoga is not advantageous. It doesn't have its benefit. It doesn't have its role and its purpose. It does. But its role and its purpose is to facilitate our being able to inquire into this truth, into this situation that we've got caught up in. So our meditation practice, the act of formally sitting down and engaging in a process of disengaging with the goings on of life. Why are we doing that? Because ordinarily we're caught up in the phenomena. And when we sit to meditate, we'll feel it. That phenomena is still playing out for us. We may be agitated, restless, and then we work through it. And we talk about creating a state of effortless concentration. Effortless concentration is a consequence of phenomena being let go of. So from the point of view of meditation, we do it as a formal practice, but it is a way of being where we are able to be in the world in a meditative position, meaning that our knowing of ourselves has been understood and seen through. We've realized it as being something without substance, something without any core base, something which is a product of the goings on of the phenomenal world. And so we are living our lives from the point of view of one who has been able to see that. And so our ignorance has, well, we've been freed from it. But when we talk about meditating, we have a tendency to engage in it as a practice that we take quite personally. And this makes sense in terms of our having to organize our lives and our routine so as to be able to make time to sit and actually engage in this inquiry, engage in this investigation into what's going on, what is our relationship to phenomena, and that relationship, how is it preventing us from just seeing? So we have to make time for it. So on that level, it makes sense to take it personally. But the consciousness, as we discussed, we are all conscious. And so that which is at the source, which is at the core of it, is the same. So in our meditation practice, it's not us being able to anchor down consciousness and say, I've got you. It's consciousness itself taking command. It always has command, but we've become aligned with it. It is the experience. It is the main thing that's going on. So in our meditation practice, we'll find challenge because we'll be using techniques. We'll be working through the residual effect which is going on in our bodies physically, emotionally, mentally. There'll be a lot taking place. And we're trying to cultivate a capacity to just be aware. And all this stuff will be murmuring, whispering, there, present. But that's all phenomena. But at the same time, we can be aware of it. And so, that awareness becomes fragmented because we are inclined to become identified with that phenomena, the restlessness, the technique, the movement in the technique, the transitions, the thought that pops in and says, is this samadhi? Am I in that state? All of that stuff that's going on is going to fragment the awareness. But the awareness itself has nothing. There's nothing defining it. And so it's a process of surrendering to awareness. And we talked about imagining absolute reality, that state of pure conscious awareness. And if we surrender to that pure conscious awareness, then where are we? And that's what Kriya Yoga is pointing towards. Who or what are we? But you could say, where are we? So within Kriya Yoga, this inquiry is referred to as svadhyaya, self-enquiry. Inquire into yourself. And it's a complex word because self, straight away we're talking about self. So we've got the I identification. But it's written with a capital S in many places, so as to point to the fact, well, it's not talking about personality. It's talking to that aspect of you which is not personalized. But the word self straight away denotes personalization. So the third pillar of Kriya Yoga is Ishvara Pranidhana, surrender to God, surrender to absolute reality. So there has to be a giving up of the self. Meaning that you still know phenomena, you still know everything that's taking place, but your experience is from the position of the seer. And then if you're in the position of the seer, that means that conscious awareness is driving. You're aligned with conscious awareness. And so the expression from the personality, from the conventions that you've assigned to, all of these things, they can still be playing out. But you're aligned to conscious awareness. And in that sense, there's a unity between us all. Because that conscious awareness is the source, it's the core expression. And that's absolute reality. Now, in order for us to achieve this, we've talked about the second pillar, svadhyaya, the third pillar, ishvara pranidhana, but we have the first pillar, which is tapas, self-discipline. And self-discipline is a fundamental aspect of our self-enquiry. Fundamentally, and maybe it's appropriate to point to tapas as meaning a burning away through heat, kind of a purification process. It's not self-discipline is a challenge, but that's an English way of explaining what tapas is about. But tapas is the burning away, experiencing of the heat to allow for transformation. Because that's what's going to happen. If we're going to let go of phenomena, we're going to experience a challenge, conflict, where you're going to experience a heat. And that heat is uncomfortable. And so the discipline is in being able to endure the heat, regardless of what the inquiry brings up. You sit with it. And as the inquiry gets ever more deeper, then the self is going to shift and transform to the point where it's no longer the self in any sense of I. It's the self as absolute reality. So the heat that we experience in terms of the phenomena, we can talk about it in terms of our formal meditation practice. We can go down that route. You might start thinking about the challenge of sitting for long hours. But again, what is the point of sitting for long hours? The focus is self-enquiry. Meditation is a tool to, like formal meditation practice is a tool to facilitate that. But self-enquiry doesn't happen only in our formal practice. It's a continuous practice. It's a walking through life with the question of how much of me is just based on convention, conditioning, what you've inherited, and how does that influence your imagination and your projections into the future? Now, none of this stuff is necessarily right or wrong. All you're trying to understand is how you've come to see it as the reality. And what you're trying to do is to understand and to experience it as being a shifting phenomenon. And that your absolute state, or the absolute state, is one which is non-shifting. It's constant. So Kriya Yoga, it can be talked about on many different levels. It's a path of self-enquiry, fundamentally, so that we can experience absolute reality. And I'm taking the self out of that, just to err on the side of caution. So I'm sharing these words just as a way for us to reflect on how we engage in our practice, and to point us in some ways towards what our goal is. And the goal is not about achieving or getting anything. It's about removing everything which is getting in the way. Okay. So with that, I'll finish today's session. Very grateful for your showing up here. And maybe in relation to some up and coming things, there's another monthly meeting in December. And I'm thinking that I might extend the time, just given the fact that it's the holy season, as Paramahansayogananda used to call it. But I'll confirm that. And then also, some of you may be aware, I'm developing this practice circle for small groups to come together and to reflect on their relationship to the yamasandniyamas, of which the pillars of Kriya Yoga form 3 niyamas. But if you want to find out more about that, you can see it on the website, davidmcgrath.ie, or you can just email me. And that's it. So thank you for your presence. And